Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Dr. Daniel Bachman. He's a U.S. economic forecaster at Deloitte to discuss trends that have been accelerated as a result of COVID-19 and how the world will evolve from the pandemic. Dr. Bachman, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
All right, now let's review the three time frames of the crisis.
At Deloitte, we have a framework for thinking about the crisis. We call it the respond, recover, and thrive periods. The respond period is what we're really going through right now. We were hoping to be in recover soon, but it's beginning to look like respond is taking longer. That's just dealing with the immediate problems that it throws up. Recover is when we begin to figure out how to manage to get out of the problem. And then, of course, thrive is the new economy that's created when we are finally beyond the crisis and thinking about our future.
What are the key sources of economic uncertainty for the near-term outlook?
So in the near-term outlook, I like to tell people I'm an economic forecaster, but right now I'm spending a lot of my time listening to epidemiology experts, forecasters in epidemiology, because a great deal of what's going to happen in the economy is going to be determined by epidemiologists and by the disease itself and how it evolves. There are other sources of uncertainty given that, for example, how we react to the virus and our ability to be successful in reducing its impact. There's also the impact of the financial system and response and recovery in other countries. Those are all things that create uncertainty for our forecast.
Moving beyond that, you see three scenarios for the economy. Tell us about that.
Well, I always do my forecast in scenarios, because if an economist gives you a single number and says GDP will be X, I can guarantee you that economist will be wrong. And as an economist, I'm used to being wrong. It comes with the territory, and that's fine. But it's better for business people to understand something about probabilities than to think in terms of single numbers. So we have three scenarios. Our baseline scenario assumes that we will have deployment of effective treatment or a vaccine by mid-2021. And that is actually somewhat optimistic if you listen to epidemiologists. We could do even better than that. But what a lot of medical people are saying is that vaccines are hard to develop. Something like 95% of all attempts to develop vaccines don't work. And while we're throwing a tremendous amount of resources at this one, it'll take a while. So we really have relatively slow growth in that scenario until mid-2021. And then the economy finally picks up once we reach the recover and thrive stages that I mentioned before. We do have a scenario with relatively low probability of a V-shaped recovery. That is a very fast recovery starting this summer. Given the developments in states like Texas and Florida, that's beginning to look a little less likely than even we thought, and we didn't think it was very likely back in June when we did the forecast. But it's certainly still something to think about. That is, the economy could really rebound very quickly. Even in that scenario, we don't reach 2019 Q4 GDP until late 2022. So in all our scenarios, we're not getting back to where we were for a long time. We also have a scenario we call no end in sight. This is not a nice thing to discuss, to be honest, but it's realistic. In this scenario, there's no vaccine. There's no effective treatment. We have constant spikes of the disease, and those spikes of the disease require us to tamp down economic activity on a rolling basis. And that really prevents growth from recovering over the entire 5-year horizon of the forecast. And we do give that a 25% probability. That's that's a scientific probability. That's a kind of just pulling it out of the air. But we want people to realize that right now, there are no guarantees. You should understand that if you're doing business planning.
Yeah, and Dr. Bachman, I would agree with you there that we have to rely on the science and the data that's available right now. And I can understand the desire to get back to the fourth quarter of 2019 and the economy we saw then, but we still don't even understand the disease. We don't know if you can get it again. We don't know how people are going to react. And despite the rhetoric, I really struggle with understanding how there's that expectation out there that there's going to be a near-term solution for this to happen. I think we might need to come to terms that the economy will evolve and it will look very different than it did in 2019. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. We just have to be patient and see what it looks like from a science perspective.
Yes, I think that's right, that we have to pay attention to the science, and we have to realize that the world will likely be very different in the future than it was in the past.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on Trade Talks. It was great to have you.
Okay, you're welcome.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.